Welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is the perils of logic. We tend to revere logic as a high state of being somehow. That logic has more value than emotion, and it should be an interesting conversation to be talking about logic and emotion, and how there are some false premises that guide any kind of conversation about the supremacy of logic that we institute in our culture. But before we get started, I want to say good morning. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Let's take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And let all those sensations bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So this conversation about logic and emotion came up yesterday, and I think it's a really important and valuable thing to look at, how we operate in many cases, but this is one really brilliant or really explicit example of how we operate under false premises. So first of all, we have this belief that human beings can be logical, that we can actually separate ourselves from emotion. First of all, that we believe that we can, first of all, and second of all, we believe somehow that that's a good thing, that emotion is a lesser state. If we're emotional, that it's a lesser state, or that emotionality is a flaw somehow. We're enculturated into that notion in so many ways. Stop being so emotional kind of thing, right? Like, emotion is a sign of weakness in our culture. But let's look at, or it has been in so many ways, let's look at this idea of logic and separating ourselves from our emotions. Just the very fact of the matter, trying to separate ourselves from our emotions, is a function that is fracturing our being, fracturing ourselves, disconnecting ourselves from ourselves. There's an intelligence to our emotions in many, many cases, and it's energy, and it's a communication from our body and being. And so when we separate ourselves from our emotions, we lose our North Star, we lose our compass, we lose our way. And it's often through our emotions that we kind of have a compass for morality, for what's okay and what's not okay. You know, we can get a gut feeling, we can, that allows us to know that something is out of alignment. How, if we separate ourselves, from our emotions, how can we possibly find a path to alignment? And if we look at what kinds of things occur when we are being or trying to be logical, so to speak, and separating ourselves from our emotions, what can happen, what often can happen, is that we make deeply immoral decisions, or decisions that have wide reaching ramifications that we don't account for. So one of the places that we can look is in business, where people will, in the name of the bottom line of a company, for example, people will make all kinds of decisions that they justify strategically, because they're taking emotion and connection and relatedness out of the picture, and it allows them to do awful things like overwork people terribly, or like sweatshop kind of environments. How can people justify this? Is because they're maybe justifying it based on the bottom line of business. There's something about the way that we relate to business and money that we justify by saying things like, it's only business. It's not personal, it's just business. Well, so what's happening there is that there's a fracturing. There's a fracturing of ourselves in such a way that we lose the ability to recognize the human costs, the environmental costs, the ramifications of what we do, because we have a specific outcome in mind, and anything that's in the way is in the way. That we consider logically how to get from one place to another. When we do that without our wholeness, without a deeper alignment, the likelihood is that the decisions that are made are unbalanced in so many ways. So that's this whole notion of separating ourselves from our emotions to begin with. And the thing is that we're operating under the premise that humans can be logical to begin with. What we oftentimes consider logic is what actually happens is that we make a determination. We want some kind of result, and then we justify it. We find an argument to support that result and justify it. And we think that that's logic, just because we can make an argument to support something. It's like on debating teams, people are given the task to argue for or against something, and it doesn't really matter what their own feelings are. right? What their own stance is, what their own beliefs are. The point is to create a cogent argument, right? So it becomes a war of words, and not uh, a an argument that is um, is whole in it, because it's disconnected. And so when we look at our culture, it's typically women who are characterized as more emotional, too emotional, and men who, at least traditionally, right, men who are more logical, and that logic, that disconnection from emotion, is lauded as superior and strong, and emotionality is characterized as weak. And this is something that we perpetuate because we're indoctrinated to it, men and women alike, where a certain level of emotionality, or being connected to our emotions, they're signals, they're communications from our body and being, the emotions, to let us know, hey, something's awry here, or something's wonderful here, or there's something that I get to work on because something got triggered, or the notion that it's somehow better to cut ourselves off from ourselves in this quote unquote logic, uh, is kind of a collective craziness that explains why there's it explains at least part of the reason why there's such dysfunction in our culture, because we have separated ourselves from ourselves, let alone from each other. And so when we are disconnected that way, we can be capable of horrible things, destroying the environment, destroying other people, just doing doing horrible things. And we justify those horrible things in the name of logic or reason, or personal gain. Oftentimes, like one of the places that we see this, for instance, in battle strategies, and we also see that the battle language is used in business so commonly, right? Where we are moving around people as if they're things. We're talking about casualties, or the cost of doing business. It's really quite remarkable, and it is founded in a patriarchal domination kind of culture, if we look at it, because it is a very gender-based kind of prejudice, right? Now, I'm not saying that logic in and of itself is bad. It's how we use and abuse it. We can be integrated and use our ability, powers of deduction, or rationality in an integrated way with our emotions in wholeness, in a place of whole, or from a place of wholeness that allows us to come to conclusions that are in greater alignment, that are considering a broader, having a broader reference point than the cold, calculated kind of logic that is so elevated in our culture. And if we look at the inherent sexism that is part of that assumption that logic or rationality is superior to emotionality, or that emotionality is weakness and rationality is strength, if we look at that underlying dichotomy, we can see that it permeates so many different dimensions of our culture. And it is an inherent sexism where even we as women, in many cases, have adopted that same false premise. And so much is built upon this faulty foundation that no wonder the culture has the challenges that we face, because those premises typically don't get questioned. They just become the foundation assumption from which we then build. And it's like building skyscrapers on quicksand, ultimately, because we're separating ourselves from ourselves, and we're separating ourselves from each other. And we then criticize ourselves for being too emotional, for example, and thereby we invalidate ourselves and our experience and our humanity. So I think it's very interesting. Another conversation from yesterday, which was really, really fascinating, is that when the notion of slavery, the concept of slavery, this I haven't been able to research this myself, but this is what the conversation was, and I invite you to check into it for yourself if you're called to. But that the model for slavery was modeled on women, the way that women were treated, where women had no right to vote, women had no right to property, women couldn't sign contracts, et cetera, and that became the model for how to structure slavery. It's craziness. I want to research this, but apparently Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her amicus brief in, I believe, 1972, made reference to this. So, again, I haven't verified that, but that's what I was made to understand yesterday. So this, I guess what we're talking about is domination and control structures, and some of the foundational false premises that allow us to hold those structures in place. Where if if someone expresses emotionality, then it in our current culture, it brands them as weak. Don't be so emotional. And so I think calling out some of these assumptions is really, really valuable, because what happens is that there will be this, in an argument or in a debate or in a conflict, oftentimes the conflict itself is built on a foundational assumption that is faulty, that is binary, that is polarized. And we talk about this a lot. And I recently experienced this in a dispute that I've mentioned to you, with a company that I had contracted to help me build my business. And they were offering me one solution and only one solution that was unsatisfactory. And they were offering to tweak that solution, because this solution is the way that things work, so to speak. And a friend characterized it like, they said, well, we're giving you peas. You can have the peas boiled, you can have them sauteed, you can have them mashed, you can have them in any number of ways. But and I was saying, I don't want peas, I want carrots. And they kept offering me peas. And this is because the foundational assumption of their argument was, this is the way. And that's kind of the false premise that we're talking about, is when everything is built on that foundation, we tend to not be able to entertain the notion of carrots when we're operating from the world of peas, if that makes any sense. So oftentimes, so for example, somebody once said to me, you're so weird. And rather than getting involved in a conversation about being weird or not being weird, defending against it or whatever, I just challenged. I said, you say that like it's a bad thing, like the challenging the foundational assumption, and rather than being engaged in the superficial argument. So we've talked about the triad of the activating force and the restraining force and the reconciling force, and usually have spoken about it as like going up a level, to a higher view, to be able to see the bigger picture perspective wise. But it also could be going down a level to see, like, where are these things, where is the foundation of that argument faulty, right? What are the assumptions that are driving that polarity, that maybe themselves are worthy of challenge? It's almost like the question that a police officer might ask somebody was, why did you kill your wife? But the person, first of all, didn't kill anybody, and second of all, wasn't married. So the false premise is kind of this attack, but based on on a misperception to begin with. And so there are many places in our lives where we operate on assumptions, like we operate on the assumption that something is bad or something is good. And or we might operate on the assumption that everybody's out to get you. So when you operate on that assumption, you can validate that as in experience. But it's, what if it's not a valid assumption to begin with? So we get to look at these false premises, and also just to circle back around this notion of logic is one of those false premises, that we can be logical, really, that we truly can be purely logical, or that that's even a good thing, right? That's the other foundational assumption, because what we look at when we're talking about cold calculated logic is separating ourselves and from the bigger picture. So I think that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, as well as my Facebook page. And I invite you to please like and follow the YouTube channel for Enlightened World Network and for me, Mira Rubin, and the links are in the description. And as always, it is a gift to be able to have the opportunity to muse and meander in our exploration of life and living and consciousness. So with much gratitude.